Hi everyone and welcome. This is Mindy Egan for lawnfawn, and in today's video I'm going to be creating an underwater pull and slide surprise card. Now, I'm going to show you how I completed my card, but I'm also going to share with you things that I would have done differently along the way. I'm going to start by stamping out and coloring in my images. Now, the stamp sets that I used is the Ahoy Matey, Shello Friend, Mermaid for You, and Smooth Sailing. I just kind of went through my collection and figured out which underwater images I wanted for my scene. I'm using my Misty stamping tool to stamp my images, and I have the Lawn Fawn 80-pound white cardstock, and I'm going to ink up the images with the Lawn Fawn jet black ink because I'm going to be using my Copic markers today to do some coloring. Now, my idea for the pull and slide surprise was to have kind of this underwater scene on the front. And then when you pulled it up, the surprise would be the buried treasure underneath. So I have some cute little images to go with my scene, starting with this fish. And I did a little bit of experimenting with colors. I have R12, YRO2, RV13, and RV10. Kind of gave the fish a little bit of coral color. Then for the gold, I am using Y35, Y18, and Y04. I also use that same color combination for that little starfish, blending everything out and just adding kind of that darker color to one side to give it that contrast. Then I have this rock. This came from the Mermaid for You stamp set. I just needed something to kind of ground my treasure chest. So for that, I did T5, T4, and T2, adding the shadowing kind of to the lines of the rock or the lines that are stamped down, and then just blending that out with a lighter color. I also did the anchor. Now, the anchor I didn't end up using, but I did still want to leave in the coloring in case you decide you want to use that in your underwater scene. My other sea critter I am coloring it with R08, R05, and R22. And then I also stamped that little gem. And I thought about doing like a ruby to go with my treasure chest, but I already had some reds and corals in there. So I went with green, which is YG07 and G08. And then I moved on to the treasure chest. So I started using E35, E33, and E31, but quickly discovered that the tip of my Copic marker for E33 is completely shot. So I ended up just using E35 and blending out a lot with the E31. And then for the back of the lid on the treasure chest, I did E37, E35, and E31. Then I just have the last pieces on the treasure chest to color in. And for that, I went for an YR27, YR24, and Y26 to kind of give it that tarnished gold look. Now, sometimes what I like to do after I finish coloring is put this back in my Misty tool, especially if I remember to leave the stamps there. And I like to stamp over the top of the image again. I know it can be risky, but I feel like it does help the black lines pop a little bit more. I lined up the coordinating dies, held them in place with Post-it tape, and ran that through my die cut machine. And now I'm going to work on the seashells. So I am using these stitched seashells, and I'm going to die cut them out of 80-pound white cardstock. I'm going to be doing some ink blending to color in my seashells, but you could just die cut them from colored cardstock. I personally love starting with white because I feel like I can really customize my colors for this. So I'm starting out with one of the seashells and using peach fuzz. That's going to give it kind of a nice glow. And then I'm going to come in with Peachy Keen, kind of starting at the bottom of the seashell and blending up. Next, I'm going to come in with another seashell, and for this one, I started with merman ink. Again, just blending over the entire thing kind of lightly. I'm not going real heavy handed with this. And then I'm going to come in with juice box, but very, very carefully because juice box was a pretty intense color. I did tap off a lot, and then I'm also coming in really, really light handed, but I love the transition of color on these seashells. And then for my starfish, I am starting out with a sugar cookie. So again, just a really nice light base color to kind of make it look like they're glowing. And then coming in with number 2 pencil. Off screen, I did a little bit of extra die cutting, and these pieces come from the platform pop-up wave wraparound. And I'm going to blend these similarly to like I did to the seashells. I'm starting out with a celery stick ink, doing that to all of them. And then I will come in with jalapeno and just add it to maybe one side or one kind of area of the seaweed just to give it that contrast. And I am working on a silicone mat. This just kind of helps my pieces from not sliding all over the place, but it also allows me to kind of glide onto my cardstock. Now, once I have all of my pieces blended, I'm going to set these off on the side, clean up my work surface, and I'm going to start working on the background for my interactive portion. Now, I did use the pull and slide surprise. This is die cut out at 80-pound white cardstock. I did the two pieces, the top cover and the tab. And then I have another piece of cardstock that is cut to 3.5 by 4 3/4. So the piece on the right hand side is cut to the same size as my pull and slide surprise. So it's going to match in width and height. And I'm using that to die cut out some stitched simple wavy borders. My idea is to create the ocean floor. And there are a few things I would have done differently. For instance, here, I would have made this a little bit higher because after the fact, you're not even going to see it. And I'll talk more about that when I hit that point. But I used my pull and slide, the front of the pull and slide, as a guide so that I could get my ocean bottoms kind of lined up correctly. So if you're doing any die cutting like this, make sure one of them is just a little bit higher than the other. I'm going to ink blend these as well. So I started out with sugar cookie ink, just kind of giving a light coating of that color over both of the borders. Then I'm going to come in with pizza crust, and I am using a blending brush for this. There are lots of different blending brushes on the market. This one, the bristles are not very compact, they're very fluffy, which allows me to kind of wisp over the borders, I guess I would say. It's a really, really light application. And then I'm going to finish off with walnut at the very, very bottom. I'm going to clean up my work surface and start working on my underwater background. Now, this color combination and this ink blending, I am going to have to do multiple times because I wanted it to be completely cohesive across all of the panels. I'm starting with the piece that has the tab at the top, and I masked that off with a piece of post-it note tape just so I could leave that white. And I started at the very top of this with merman ink. It's a really beautiful light blue, really reminds me of the ocean. I'm also going to do this to the front panels. So this is going to be our interactive piece that moves. So I started ink blending at the top. For each one, I go about maybe 3/4 of the way down. Then I'm going to come in with Forget Me Not. So this one, I'm coming in from the bottom and working my way up. And I want it to be a little bit darker towards the bottom and then just kind of gradually transition and mix into the merman. It makes the most beautiful underwater background color combination. So again, doing this to both panels, but then realizing I still had one more that I needed to do. And the next panel I'm going to do is the 3.5 by 4 3/4. So this is going to be the scene that is actually going to be revealed when you pull the tab. So I did those same color combinations and just the same technique. And later on, I actually have to do another one. So it's a lot of ink blending, but it went pretty fast. I thought I would add a little interest to these backgrounds by using the Ocean Waves stencil. And I am putting a little bit of repositionable tape on the back of my pull tab piece and also the interactive piece. It is very important that you're using a repositionable tape because if any sticky residue is left on that panel that has the actual interactive portion, then it's going to stick and your interactive piece won't work. So make sure whatever you're using, if you do, is repositionable and can easily be removed. So I just took the wave stencil and I moved it around on the front of both of the panels using a small blending brush and the same color of ink, but I'm not going in very heavy handed. It's just a really, really light application just to give each of them a little bit of interest and movement to the card. And then once I'm done, I will flip these over and I can just rub this repositionable tape away with my fingers. If you find you have sticky residue on it, you may want to get an adhesive remover, or I have even used anti-static powder tool to kind of go over any stickiness, but I really highly recommend a repositionable tape. Off screen, I die cut out my two tracks. So these are the two skinny strips. There is a die that does this for you. And I am adding the 1/8 of an inch double-sided tape to one side of it. This is going to be our track that we are going to attach to our interactive portion. So the panel that has the score lines or the interactive portion, you want to flip it over. Then I can remove the backing of that double-sided tape and I'm going to line these strips up on each side. So you can see here, I'm just lining it up flush with the edge, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. And that is our track for our interactive piece. Now, once that is done, we can flip this back over. And when we originally die cut this, it did provide these score lines for us. So the one at the very top, you're going to fold up. And then you want to reinforce that fold with a bone folder. You want to have these folds be nice and crisp. It's just going to have our interactive piece work better and it'll stand up better on display. Now you have a middle score line. You'll fold that down or create a mountain. Again, make sure that you are reinforcing that with a bone folder. And then we have one last one down at the bottom. It's just a little flap, and that one is going to fold up. So a lot of times I will just stick my fingernail in that crease and then gently fold it over just to get it started. And then again, using my bone folder to really get that crease in there. Now we are going to flip this over, and that last tab that we did, or that last fold we did, we want to put double-sided tape on the back of that because this is what is going to attach to our tabbed panel. Now, I'm going to stay right here. If you kind of know what your scene is going to be, you're going to want to put your sentiment on now before you attach this top panel, and you'll see why in a minute. But what you're going to do is you're going to take your folded piece you just did, and also your tabbed piece. And you're going to line up these two pieces so that they are flush. You want the tops to line up perfectly. Your tab is going to line up in that notch area. And then you can remove the backing of that double sided tape on that bottom flap and then fold that down. So it's really, really easy to put together, but you are going to need to kind of have a plan in action so that you can get your sentiment stamped on there before your pop up comes in. And now I can start working on the assembly. So here I have my two ocean bottoms that I did, and you're going to see why I mentioned that you should have one that probably goes a little bit higher. But I started by adding tape runner to the one. This is going to be the panel that's kind of behind the interactive piece. So right now, it looks really good. I'm really happy with the placement of that. So I can start filling it in and start decorating it. There is the rock that I had mentioned earlier. That is just kind of a grounding point for me. And then I can start building up, like hiding some seaweed behind the treasure chest. And each one of these, I'm just using a tape runner with, or you may want to use liquid glue with the seaweed because we don't want our interactive sliding piece to catch on any of our die cuts. I also added my little gem in there and then those extra pieces of gold coins. So now I'll go in and add the 1/8 of an inch double-sided tape to those tracks, those thin strips of cardstock that we added before. I'm going to place that over the top so we can start attaching our interactive portion. I'll remove the backing of both of these pieces and then we can place this over the top of our scene. So again, the piece with the treasure chest measures 3.5 by 4 3/4, which lines up perfectly with our pull and slide surprise piece. And so now when I pull the tab at the top, everything slides perfectly. I did have a couple little catches with the seaweed. So later on, I did come in and add some liquid glue behind it. And I do have some other tips to share about this a little later on. Now I can start decorating my cover. So here I brought in that other piece that's the sandy bottom or our ocean floor, and I'm going to pop this up so it doesn't get in the way of our interactive piece. So I'm adding thin strips of foam tape to this, and you're going to see when I open this why I mentioned having that one in the background be a little bit higher because we really aren't going to end up seeing it, and I didn't think about that at first. I think it's a cool idea. I just probably should have either moved it up a little bit more or just made one of these a little bit higher. So now here, once I pulled my tab and I realized we really couldn't see it, I was kind of bummed, but I think it's still a really cool concept. And if you decide to do it, just make one a little bit bigger so you can see it in the background. Now I can start building up my scene for the front of the interactive card. And I always start by placing everything on there first and then kind of picking up the things in the background, working from back to the front. A couple key things to keep in mind is that anything past that fold, you do not want that to glue down. You want that to kind of pop up. So when they pull the tab, it's going to look like this cute little scene and not be glued down past that fold line. So a lot of times I'm using tape runner. Maybe for the seaweed or some of the smaller pieces, I would use the liquid glue, but just make sure nothing is glued down past that center fold line. So I'm going to continue just filling in my scene with the seashells using my tape runner. Now, the anchor, I really thought it was a cool concept, but it just didn't work with these seashells on the front. And I didn't want to add too much more to the inside because I didn't want to risk my interactive part kind of catching any more than it already was. So now we come to one of my biggest dilemmas, which was I did not stamp a sentiment before gluing my interactive piece down. And I could have probably added something to the very front, maybe die cutting out a banner and stamping on a banner. But here was my solution is I picked out a sentiment from Ahoy Matey and I laid it out straight on my work surface. I picked it up with a clear block and then I'm going to stamp it onto the tab because that was my initial idea was to pull the tab and then have this sentiment right there under the tab. So I just went ahead, used my clear block and some black ink and stamped that down. Off screen, I did another ink blended panel with the same colors that I used for the rest of the card. That piece is measuring 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So this is going to be my main card front piece. I am adding it to a side folding card base using a tape runner. And then I'm going to add foam tape behind my interactive piece and add this to the front of the card. If I had put my thinking cap on, I would have done another seafloor bottom on that piece as well, but I didn't think of it right away. Now, here are a couple tips is your images on the inside, you can flatten with a bone folder, just kind of burnish that down a little bit. You can also take an anti-static powder tool and just lightly go over it so that nothing sticky is sticking out and it'll help make your mechanism slide a little bit better. Now, I didn't add anything to that pull tab piece. There is a die in the pull and slide surprise collection that you can die cut out a tab and put it up there, but I'm okay with it just being white like that. I think it actually kind of looks a little neat, but everything works, everything slides really well. I'll be honest, I felt like it was kind of plain. I really wished I would have decorated that main background panel in some way, whether adding some fish to it or maybe adding that seafloor bottom. I really wish I would have thought that out a little bit better, but it's a great starting point and it's a great learning point for me. I came in with a few finishing touches, starting with unicorn stickles. I added that to the seashells just to give it some sparkle. And then I used a white gel pen to add highlights to the fish, the seashells, and also my seaweed. I say seaweed, but I meant to say algae, but I think you know what I mean. So, all in all, it is an adorable scene. I love these stitched seashells and the fun color combinations that I used for them. And then you pull it up and you reveal the underwater surprise, which is that treasure chest full of gold coins. I hope you enjoyed today's card project and are inspired to create using the pull and slide surprise. It is really a very easy interactive card to create. And I also hope that you find my tips useful when you go to create. Thanks for watching.